listeners, and welcome to another episode of Get Smarter, an LCE podcast. Today's episode is going to be connected to some of our recent episodes around reliability and capital projects. And we're going to build on a lot of those concepts that you may have heard in previous episodes. And get this, I'm so excited because we have Randy Heisler back on our podcast. The last time he was on our podcast, we were talking about preventative predictive maintenance. This time, we are going to be unpacking an often overlooked but mission critical concept of pre-startup support. So we're going to talk about everything from asset reliability to workforce alignment, and we're going to explore with Randy what operational readiness really looks like, who needs it, and why skipping it can lead to costly setbacks. Randy Heisler is the Vice President of Reliability Consulting Group. He's primarily focused on helping metals, mining, and chemicals industry organizations. And prior to his 20 plus years with life cycle engineering, he had 25 years in maintenance and reliability in the steel industry and is involved in lots of association and guidance bodies as a visible expert in the industry. So after all of that introduction, welcome to the podcast, Randy.
Thanks, Tara. Thanks for having me. It's great to be back.
Yeah, I'm glad you're back. This is a really interesting topic to me because we want to talk about why some people often overlook this phase or this pre-startup support that we're going to be discussing, but how it can set the foundation for long-term operational success. So I want to start off with what exactly is pre-startup support and how is it different from commissioning or startup activities?
Wow, that's a big question, Tara, but I'll do my best. And I'll elaborate too as we go forward. I think, what we're going to talk about today, in pre-startup support, really focuses on what's going to be needed from a maintenance reliability standpoint in order to have a successful startup, okay? And then, lowering the risk and providing a sustained situation, with the asset that we've put in place, or in some cases, the plant, right, that we've built. So, typical commissioning and startup activities, really, if you ask most folks, about it, they'll say, well, it's about operations. Okay? Yeah, it's about getting things bolted down and ready to run and all that type of thing. But it's very focused on operations and not as much on the maintenance and the long-term reliability of the assets.
Right. So we're talking about before the bolts are set, before that switch is flipped, and we can start manufacturing, we can start running. Could you give me, you gave us some examples of some operations-based work about how to get that manufacturing up and running. Could you give me an example of what a maintenance pre-startup support task might be? Just one or two.
Sure. I guess the best example I can think of, from a maintenance perspective is, there's certain equipment that's going to be very critical for the operation. Sometimes so much that, there is a single point failure, okay, can shut the plant down. So that's, where, people really need to focus on the maintenance side of things to ensure that, hey, we know what's critical. Maybe in some cases, we haven't even built a hierarchy, for the equipment in the CMMS. So that's something that needs to be done. But just saying, hey, what's most critical and how am I going to prevent a failure, right? Even during startup or after that.
Right. And I think that is such a different perspective. You just put on new lenses from the tasks that you were just describing before. So I think this is a good setup for, our listeners today. So why do you think it's easy to underestimate the importance of operational readiness, of pre-startup support? during a new facility, or maybe not even a whole new facility, but we know that there's a lot of capital expansions that have been going on recently and are planned for the future. So it could be a new production line launch. Why do you think that it's easy to underestimate the importance of this pre-startup readiness?
Well, I'll kind of go back a little bit to what I said before, but, whether it's a small project or a big project, there's still a lot of moving pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And the typical project manager that's in charge of spending that capital money properly is really, focused on how to get this thing done, on time and under budget. Okay.
Right.
And a lot of times, the cost that was put into it, doesn't even consider, the different maintenance aspects. So, they just don't typically think about it. If you talk to a project manager, you rarely hear about the maintenance thing. That's something that happens later. Okay. That person's in charge of getting this new equipment put in place. Okay. And making sure that it operates properly and turning it over right to the plant, turning it over to the operations people. And then there's a major focus on, even from an operations perspective, on how to operate it. And there just isn't a lot of that, what I think is really proactive thinking in terms of, what are the right maintenance strategies to be put in place. That's something that comes later. It's like, hey, this equipment's new. We don't even think about it. I went to a plant one time and they've been operating for, I think, a year or more. And I said, well, hey, what's your maintenance strategy? And the maintenance manager was, pretty candid because we don't have one. The equipment was new. We put it in and it's got a good startup and we're just now starting to see all these problems. Okay. And I just found it quite interesting. And it was confirmed my suspicions that just so many people, focus on the project. They focus on getting it put in place. They kick the tires when it's done. They turn it over and their part's done. It's like buying a new car. We don't think about maintenance and reliability too much later, right? And it's like, wow, this thing's going to run forever. It's brand new. But if we can focus on these things up front, the startup's going to be smoother, the risk will be lowered, and there'll be less problems down the road.
I love your analogy to a new car. Well, it's new. It's not going to fail, but need I remind our listeners, what did reliability centered maintenance, RCM, tell us about failures? Are they wear out failures predominantly or random? And isn't there a certain thing called low infant mortality? So, and what about if you accidentally, or not accidentally, what about if it's not installed correctly? Or what about if we didn't do precision maintenance when we before we bolted it down or when we bolted it down and that thing's already vibrating from day one and we don't have a strategy for it? Am I speaking to the choir here?
You're speaking to me, that's for sure.
Anyway, I just think it's really interesting, but I think you articulated that exactly about why it's so important for it not to be an afterthought. But let's take a step back and think about that project manager and those operators. So who in a manufacturing or any industrial organization benefits from operational readiness, or AKA pre-startup support?
Such a softball question, Terry. Everyone's going to benefit, right? Mm-hmm. Operators are going to have less issues, right? They got their hands full in a startup. They're trying to still learn how to run the equipment, and then if things go wrong, it just compounds the situation. It's like, oh gosh, I'm not even sure how to operate it well yet. Here it is breaking down on me. On the maintenance side, they get to spend their time preventing and predicting failure instead of firefighting. That infant mortality thing can be horrific. I mean, I was involved in a startup of a brand new facility back in my steel days, and a lot goes on, okay, in those first days, weeks, months that you just don't anticipate. But if you can do the right things ahead of time, if we can think proactively, okay, which is what this is all about, we can prevent those things from happening. And just another side of the house, which our accountants, right? The people that, in charge of the money can see lower costs and increase productivity and product output, which is what everyone wants. Okay?
Right.
So that's why, I go back to saying who benefits? Everyone.
Yeah, no, there's definitely no downside to having both operations and maintenance in consideration on these capital projects and new plant builds. So let's talk about that a little bit more, about the workforce just in general. You mentioned that the operators are, and just the whole, operations side, a production side, whatever it's called in your organization, is really focused on getting people ready to know how to operate this beautiful new equipment. But what other workforce development or operator readiness should be taken into account when we're thinking about a greenfield or a new line?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind for me is training, right? I mentioned the operator learning to run the equipment, and there's certainly a lot of training that goes in place, before they, go live, right, with the equipment. But it's also true on the maintenance side. Training needs, can be identified up front before we ever hit the switch, okay? For, technicians, just the same as operators. So, the maintenance tasks and the operator procedures can be standardized from day one. If we put the time and effort in up front, okay? And we certainly do, I think for the most part, in the startups, that certainly a lot of focus on how to operate it, okay? Because that's the crux of what we're trying to do, is operate the equipment to make whatever product is we're making, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But it's so true from a maintenance perspective that people get involved, and I've seen it done really well. There's a particular company that we're supporting right now that, as the equipment is being installed, the technicians are out there with the construction people and the engineering people, actually putting the equipment together and learning how it operates and so on. And it's just such a proactive approach.
Would you say that's a best practice?
Well, it's one of the best practices I've ever seen. If you can do it, once again, it's sometimes it's about the money. Sometimes it's about, hey, do we have the budget to bring the maintenance people on early enough, right? That they can be out there actually helping to build, this new, in this case, a new facility. And can they learn, from the ground level, how the equipment works? And I certainly think it's the best practice.
Well, it definitely sounds like a strong approach. And, honestly, as an employee doing either function, I like to feel prepared, right? Like I know what my expectations are and how I can make things successful. So I can't imagine that it wouldn't also make the teams more confident and ready to work together in the case of, future issues or that come up. So
Well, and
no,
they
I would
can
agree.
get ownership.
Take ownership. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's key. So now I want to talk not about the people, but you did mention CMMS, an asset hierarchy. So I want to kind of circle back to that because, gosh, I mean, getting all that aligned from day one on what are your assets, where are they, what are their spare parts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What role do you see data? I guess we could call it asset strategy, and any like new technologies that an organization wants to put into their brand new facility or new asset. What do you think that the role that those things play is in this pre-startup phase?
Well, I think they're huge. I think, I mentioned it earlier that, you know, building a hierarchy is a very important thing to do. I mean, it really, creates the foundation for the work that's going to be done later, right? So that you've got a good hierarchy in place. But even going a little deeper on the hierarchy is, what's the what's the model number, serial number? What's all the important information on an asset that we should capture up front? And it doesn't have to be running to do that. We can do it ahead of time, right? With the drawings and information and OEM manuals and out there physically, walking down the assets as they're being installed. So that data and collecting that data, getting it into the hierarchy, and then go right on into bill of materials. Okay. And it's just those things which, I think are very foundational, can help get your CMMS set up, okay, ahead of time. So that on day one, you're capturing good information, you've got the data that you need, the technicians have all the information they need, and so on. So that's kind of the front end piece. But, I guess to go along with that, Tara, is you now have the ability to look at, from a maintenance strategy standpoint, what kind of technologies do I have or should I have?
Right.
And am I getting the sensors, let's say, put in place where they need to be? Are they measuring the right things? It allows you to make the right decisions on what should be time-based, what should be condition-based, right? So, what are those predictive tasks that should be in place? What are the technologies that we can put in place ahead of time? It allows time if you have to install sensors. Okay, a lot of times today equipment comes with sensors, but what if they don't, right? Or what if there's additional ones that we need? That then helps us position ourselves for, one of the new buzzwords today, predictive analytics.
Ooh.
So, can't say enough about the data, right? Everybody, wants data. Sometimes people have too much data, or there's never really such a thing as too much, but they have more than they can handle. They don't know how to, do the analysis. Maybe it goes back to the training thing. If I'm going to use this technology, what kind of training is going to be required to do that, or what type of outside support might be needed? So it plays a huge role.
Right. And I think you said a couple of important things there about, putting that good first foot forward. I probably should not have chosen words to say like that. First foot forward. Allows you to make data-driven decisions. Let's just do that, so that you're going to get the most out of either the technology that's innate in the assets that you've procured, or the technology that you're going to add, to some existing assets. And we have been, a lot of the calls that, we get are because a lot of this stuff wasn't done, in the beginning. So now we have to clean it up and get things back on track. So speaking of that, life cycle, 50 years, right, of being in asset management, reliability, and maintenance support. So we've had a lot of experience on both sides, greenfields, brownfields, CMMS decision making, and helping get the CMMS to tell you the insights that you want it to. So we've been kind of working on all sides of whatever problem our customer have. But I know that we've been spending a lot of time, you've been spending a lot of time, Randy, helping to develop a methodology to support operational readiness, to execute pre-startup support for the people that we're working with that need it. Can you just step us through the methodology that LCE has adopted to help organizations start off on that right foot?
I'll do my best. Yeah, I think, when I think about it, going back to the, what's most critical, and
right.
What to me, as an old maintenance guy, that, if I didn't have the parts when something broke, that was like disastrous. I could fix it if I had the parts, right? So the parts are so critical. So, I think we've learned that, hey, number one, let's see, what's going to be needed. Let's determine what are the most critical assets, and then what are the most critical spare parts that we're going to need, because we may need those on day one. So, our approach is, once again, it's all based on risk, okay, to the startup and to the sustained operation. So, I like to think about starting with identification, critical spares, to handle those infant mortality things you mentioned earlier, right? It's going to happen. And we recently had a chemical plant being built that I give them a lot of credit because they saw the light early on. It's like, oh my gosh, we don't have the parts. And we're not even sure what parts to have. Okay, this was a first of its kind type chemical plant. So for them, they agreed with us 100%. Let's do an asset criticality. Let's turn that into what are the most critical spares that we're going to need for startup, and it just sets the stage, to make sure that this thing that's so rudimentary that we have it. That if something breaks, we have the part we need. Okay, because if you don't, the startup's not going to go well. We're going to sit there waiting, right? In some cases, for something to come in. But like we mentioned earlier, if you can focus on the parts first, build the hierarchy, get the BOMs in place, those are just logical, next steps. And then after that, it's really looking at then, like I mentioned earlier, what are the maintenance strategies that need to be in place for that critical equipment that provides that sustainable startup, the ongoing sustainability, and what we like to call a reliable operation. So, those kind of strategies, I think are priceless. Okay. They include the preventive maintenance programs, the predictive maintenance programs, the operator tasks that need to be in place if we're going to bring operations into the fold on helping to maintain the assets, whether it's checklists or just rounds that they might make on a daily basis. It's figuring all that out up front is step one. Okay, and it's just so important, and it really puts you in a position of setting yourself up for doing best practice work management, best practice material management, reliability engineering, building those processes that you're going to need. How are we going to run our maintenance program? How are we going to run the maintenance system? How are we going to use the CMS? Making all those determinations up front, once again, I don't want to use the word priceless too much, but because here's what happens, Tara. If you start up a new plant, you haven't done some of this upfront work, once it starts, it's like the fires are burning and everybody's running, and it's, we're all focused on, trying to keep the place running and have a good startup. And then guess what happens? You don't have the time to do these things. So, what we try to do is help people get as much of these things done before they hit the switch, right? And I'm trying to think of, maybe a few other areas there, but getting those, what we tend to call business processes in place, right? You don't have people questioning, how's the system going to work? It's been laid out, it's defined. The roles and responsibilities have been defined. The tasks are all defined from day one. And we touched on it earlier. The next piece, is the training. Identifying who needs training, what do they need trained on. It's and in some cases not training. I call it education.
Right.
Getting managers to understand, what does reliability mean? What's my role in it? Why should I care about it? Okay, and getting some of those things done up front can help you. Basically, we use the term reliability excellence. Get the plant started with reliability excellence in place, and we've worked with some very proactive companies that's exactly what they've done. So they've not waited because they've learned, right? In one case, I remember a client that had multiple plants, and they had some really good plants. They had some plants that were not so good, and so as they built new plants, they said, why can't we take the good and put it in place up front? Why can't we define how we're going to run the business of maintenance before we even start the plant. So that's what we're talking about is doing that. And I think that helping people understand why they should do that up front, and then some of the nuts and bolt training that goes along with it, helps align the organization. And so that now they're all speaking the same language. They understand how important reliability is, not just to the startup, but to the long-term sustainability in their role in doing that. I know that was long-winded, Tara, but
No, it was great. I think you just expounded on what is the meaning of a culture of reliability. And that is the meaning of a culture of reliability, where everybody in the plant knows their role in reliability. And I love how you stepped through the operational readiness, but also it follows with our what we call the risk-based asset management methodology, right? Where you're identifying your critical assets, your critical spares, doing FMEAs when you need to, creating those maintenance plans, getting your processes in place for the core 3+, but that's reliability, storeroom and work management, and then training and education, and kind of talked about the difference between those. So I think you lined that out really well. So I want to thank you for that.
it's not easy. It's not easy, but
no, but you've seen it be done, and you've seen it be successful.
yeah.
And then you've seen the other side of it too.
Yeah, I always go back to my friends I've made along the way that we're focused on lean manufacturing, right? And it's such a great concept that what you're really trying to do in all aspects, and especially in this startup situation, is creating what's called standardized work. Simply said, we're doing the same thing repeatedly, okay, in a controlled environment. And if we can do that, before the fire started burning and the switch has been turned on, we're going to be so far ahead of the game that life's going to be much better.
That's a lovely thing. And I think I can't think of a better way to, just wrap up, what all we've talked about today. We talked about a lot. We've talked about proper planning for operational readiness, about workforce preparation, about asset readiness before that switch is flipped into operations, and how it lays the groundwork for safe, efficient, you use the word sustainable, avoiding the stress, the firefighting, the anxiety when the plant starts of, oh my gosh, we got to keep it running. If you can prepare people early, it reduces the risk. It makes it more of a smooth, comfortable startup. And then you talked about, our approach, which has been successful, but I think our listeners can imagine the results that it can get. And we will be attaching some resources to this episode, listeners, that share what some of those results look like. I mean, Randy, could you share like an example of that, maybe from that chemical plant that that you can recall that they're reaping the benefits of, now because they were so prepared?
Oh, there's no doubt. I don't know, maybe one of my best examples is a plant we helped start up in Iceland, right? Not one of the easiest places in the world to be for a plant startup, weather-wise and location-wise and so on. But the example, I give there follows, what I talked about, which was what are they work very hard, okay, to get all of the things in place that we've discussed today. And they were a company that we had assessed many of their other plants, their older plants, and we have a reliability excellence score that we give plants that ranges from 0 to 1,000. Okay, and many times, in going into an existing plant, they may not score very high, but this particular company, had goals that, they wanted their plants to be in the 700 club. They wanted at least to get them into, a highly proactive.
Proactive, yeah.
And so that was a challenge. But so when they started building a new plant, they said, why can't we do all the things that we've learned? Why can't we set up all these things, like I mentioned, like getting the hierarchies, the VOMs, the equipment data, the PMs, the PDMs, the lubrication programs, the standardized work. Why can't we get all that in place? Why can't we have all the processes defined? Why can't we have the organization structured properly? And the answer was, yeah, absolutely you can do that. Why can you not do that? Right? So they did that. And they within a year of operation, we were able to, fortunate enough they asked us to come back and say, okay, how about scoring us now? Okay, the plant's a year old. Let's see just how well we've done. And that plant was just under 700. I think it was like 693. Okay. After 1 year of operation. So.
Oh man, you couldn't grade them on a curve. No.
But that just speaks to the success. Okay. That
yes.
Year they had everything in place. They were very proactive. The equipment, was running like a Swiss watch, and it's still one of their best plants today.
There you go. And I bet if you went back today, they'd be in that 700 club. So that's an inspiring story. That's an inspiring story. Thank you so much, Randy. And thank you for joining me today on the podcast. I mean, I want to talk again about some of the takeaways. So again, this pre-startup readiness, just like the story that you just told and shared with us, it is a critical risk reduction strategy, but it also makes, if you do the work, it also makes your plant run more smoothly, and your workforce is more engaged and has a better quality of life. The earlier, if you are on a capital project, or if you are on a new build or an expansion, the earlier that you involve all of the stakeholders, maintenance, operations, and reliability, the better the outcomes. And then strong workforce alignment, as well as the asset readiness. So don't just focus on the equipment, but also focus, on the people, and that's essential to success. Anything else that you'd like to add, Randy?
I think I've said enough, Tara.
I have kept you a while, but
I could talk all day. But you can't tell I've got some passion around it. But
well. Yes, I can. And I guess we're just going to have to bring you back another time to talk about something else here on the Get Smarter podcast.
Yeah. Anytime, Tara.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And I think our listeners certainly have gained a lot from this episode. But if you'd like to explore more about this topic, check our session notes or head straight over to lce.com. We have some additional success stories there, some of our Randy's clients and projects, in fact, that you can read about there, and just learn more about this service, or just more ways that LCE can help you embrace that culture of excellence, right? And be in that 700 club. So again, Randy, thanks so much for joining me. And for our listeners, stay tuned and stay smarter.